Good afternoon and welcome to Drapers Connects. Drapers Connects is our series of digital events and virtual content which aims to connect the industry via Q&A discussions, panel talks and webinars such as this. My name is Graham Moran and I am the Associate Editor here at Drapers. So thank you all for joining us. If you are watching live, please do ask questions throughout and I'll put them to our panelists and we'll do our best to answer them as we go. There should be the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, so do send in your questions if you have any. In partnership with Joor, today we will be discussing strategies for success and the future of fashion's wholesale model in a digital world. So I'm very happy to welcome today's panelists. We have Ben Banks, who is the founding partner and director at For Marketing, which manages wholesale, agency representation and distribution for brands including Stone Island, CP Company and E Squared. We have Darren Ski from New Rate Agency, coming all the way from New York. Thank you for joining us nice and early in your time zone. So following buying and merchandising roles at the likes of Harvey Nichols on the buyer side, he founded sales agency New Way in 2017, which now represents and consults with brands including Holzweiler and Serge Denis. We also have Alan Cunningham, who is the Vice President of Brand and Retail Sales at wholesale platform Joor. Thank you all three for joining us. For anyone who did register nice and early, unfortunately, the representative from Axel Elgato could not join us today in the end. So we will carry on as three. So I'm going to hand over to Alan to kick us off with an introduction to Joor and the conversation we're going to have today.
Cheers, Graham. Thank you very much. So just a very quick, essentially 30-second elevator pitch of who we are and what we do. Joor was founded in 2010, and its original inception was to serve as a B2B platform, or essentially a digital line sheet for the fashion industry. And over the last 12 years, we've evolved into the world's leading digital wholesale ecosystem, essentially transforming the way brands and retailers do business. And just some kind of numbers to put behind my statement of world's leading. We work with 13,400 brands and 390,000 retailers across 151 countries. So again, it kind of goes some way to back up our statement. Not only that, but Joor processes more than $1.8 billion in terms of wholesale orders going through the platform every month. So again, with these figures in mind, we very much regard ourselves as the market leading.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. So to kick us off, I thought I'd give a bit of context to the conversation. Obviously, the last few years have been very disruptive. Fashion's traditional wholesale particularly was disrupted by the global pandemic. Trade shows were cancelled, showrooms were shut, and stores remained closed for months at a time. While this, for some brands, this shifted a focus to a D2C model, today wholesale is still super important and lucrative to successful business strategies for brands and retailers here in the UK and around the world. So to kick us off, I thought we would ask the panel kind of to give some context of the wholesale market today. You know, where does it sit? How is it faring? And particularly, I'm interested to know throughout that disruption of COVID, if there's anything that you learned within that wholesale ecosystem that you're kind of bringing forward today. Ben, I'm going to pick on you to kick us off, if you don't mind.
Thanks for picking on me. I think an interesting start point for us is as a multi-brand showroom, covering both distribution behaviours and agency. A very interesting aspect of COVID was it wasn't, in our experience, a universal experience for everybody. So different brands were affected in different ways. So across some of our portfolio where we had brands, women's dresses or high summer product, the timing coincided with some of our LA brand partners seeking to deliver high summer product. And going out and traveling and going on holiday was obviously a complete non-starter at that point in time. So that posed us a lot of difficulties in terms of being in between the relationships, as it were, where we were committed to stock on behalf of our retail customers and some stock programs that we run. See, the brands themselves believed they had orders from us. And we had to tread, I think we managed to tread a pathway between supporting and accepting levels of cancellations and reductions, but also making sure that we didn't get left solely holding the baby, as it were. And perhaps an outturn of that was it did lead to a bit more, there's a legacy perhaps across many brands of a bit of legacy stock that then feeds its way into off-price channels and so on, which further down the line creates some congestion. I think everyone was extremely fearful. None of us knew what was going to happen. Would people stop spending completely? So even if you had a very developed e-commerce business, would that transition into meaningful sales? And I think what did happen was e-commerce sort of erupted because people were sat at home. Then there were government support techniques that were put in place, and people had actually felt they had money to spend and ended up feeling, in some cases, perhaps quite secure about what their position was. And similarly, I mean, we know from discussions we have with our customers, and a lot of the independents and boutiques became very agile in terms of how they tried to continue to service their customers. And that sort of innovative entrepreneurial spirit that independents obviously have to undertake from time to time really shone through. Then we kind of were perhaps surprised at how certain categories of product continued to grow, especially in in menswear, particularly that kind of sportswear, fleecewear, sweatwear. Probably we saw some of that in the women's business as well. And then we've pivoted into a kind of revenge moment where everybody wants to get very dressed up because they can go out again. So I sense there's some imbalances in stock portfolios in the market, in the wholesale market, and I think between the relationship between customers and brands and wholesale, we're going through a bit of a reset moment in terms of trying to get that realignment correct, whilst facing all the current headwinds that we have to read about. Probably best we didn't read about it every day.
Darren, was there any kind of big takeaways for you, and how are you, if you were to take a punt at saying, how is wholesale performing for you today?
Yeah, so I think wholesale is performing extremely well for us, and has been since the beginning of COVID and the lockdown. And I think Ben touched on it in terms of the nimbleness of retailers, but also from an agency point of view, we had to be very nimble as well. And we transformed our business from being solely sales focused to providing an element of consultancy, and that grew throughout the lockdown. And the reason we did that was to, when you're a sales agent, generally you're just reliant on what the brand gives you to sell. There's not a lot of impact you give at a higher level. So from a consultancy point of view, if you consult with the brands you're selling, you can impact that end product in a greater way, and also the distribution strategy that they're going after. So the nimbleness that we had was we transformed in terms of we focus more on pure play online businesses. Again, knowing that these were the ones that were going to drive significant volume through COVID, and Ben touched on it as well. It was a little bit iffy at the beginning and whether they'll actually materialize. But as we gradually went through the lockdown, we saw that the online players and people like Browns, Matches, End, Net, Mr. Porter, these are the guys that really accelerated their growth because of their online channels being so strong. So we really focus on those guys as our strategic direction partners. Our biggest brand that we've worked with over that time is wholesale. They took a big chance on us at the beginning and decided to come with us as a consultancy client. And I think the reason that was such a big jump for them is because no one knew what the next year, 2 years would actually hold. And they did what a lot of successful people did, was took an educated risk and said, we're going to really grow our business and invest in people who've got expertise in certain areas. And the results are phenomenal. We grew the business almost 70% during lockdown, from almost 19 million euros up to 30 million euros. And that was really just being focused on the end consumer, being the retailer, and focusing on partners we knew could sustain that growth during the tough time. So I think, for us, it's been a challenge, but I think we have seen significant growth. And to your talking about the future as well, we really have to think carefully about what the next year, 2 years entail, because it's no surprise to hear about the economy being in such a tricky state, and it's a very different set of issues that we're going to experience now that we did at the beginning of COVID. So again, we have to be nimble, and we really have to think about strategies in which we can circumnavigate the tough times which we will all probably experience over the next couple of years.
Definitely. Thank you, Darren. Alan, on to you. As you said at the beginning, Joor works with a lot of businesses around the world. What would you say are some of the biggest lessons that Joor took away from that kind of disruption to look ahead to the future?
It sounds like it always sounds strange to put a positive spin on a pandemic, but what you realized is pandemics are good for business. It's incredible. I think the growth that Joor saw was exponential, and it's interesting because my background is fashion as well, wholesale sales. So at the very beginning of COVID, I started within the brand I was working for as part of VF Corporation. And then 3 months in, I kind of pivoted into Joor. So I got a good understanding of how it was for brands, but then to see how a tech company is performing and managing throughout this, it was incredible. COVID essentially expedited an evolution that was already underway. As I mentioned, being a 12-year-old company, the digitization of wholesale had already begun, and Joor had made significant inroads way before my time, so I can't take any credit. And I was primarily focused on the luxury end of the market, but they were working with Richemont, Kering, Capri Holdings, all of the luxury brands. And even still, we command about 75% of the luxury market. What happened during COVID was the rest of the industry realized we need a solid B2B tool or an alternative to in-person meetings. And this is where the kind of floodgates opened for kind of Joor, and the level of inbound inquiries and demos that the sales team was doing was again completely unexpected, and not like anything we'd ever seen. So it is essentially COVID, as I said, fast-tracked our timeline, and it was an interesting time because, of course, Ben and Darren will know, pre-COVID, everybody will know how archaic and how long overdue this digitization was required for. In my opinion, I liken the enhancement of the B2B side to the launch of e-commerce in the late 90s and early 2000s. There were the early adopters, the ASOSs and the Zalandos and those guys who got on board early and kind of evolved with the industry as it evolved. And there were the latecomers who put all of their emphasis on the physical in-store experience who didn't really put much reinforcement behind their e-commerce. And then when COVID hit, they were caught short and they were panicking, trying to pivot and put resources behind their e-commerce. So it's an interesting comparison, but there are definitely correlations between the two, the B2B and the D2C that happened over 20 years ago. But yeah, as I say, it was an interesting time.
Yeah. Thanks, Helen. You touched on a point that I was going to move on to there about obviously during COVID and the months and years that followed, trade shows, well, before that, trade shows, showrooms, and kind of real life appointments, seeing clothes in real life, meeting people, networking was such an important part of the wholesale kind of ecosystem. That's how it worked. I remember, seeing the likes of Darren at every trade show that we would go and cover, and it was so important and integral to the industry. But when they all shut down and closed for months and months on end, that did force, for some people, but for other people, kind of speed up that adoption of this kind of virtual online ordering, that kind of thing. But now that we're back to some sort of reality, I wondered, where do we sit now? Are trade shows and showrooms just as important, or is there this 100% shift to digital? Darren, what's your opinion on that? I know, as I said, back in the day, you definitely were at trade shows and definitely were an important part of your business. So how do you feel about them now?
Yeah, listen, I think I don't think the importance is any less on showrooms. We know trade shows have been getting less important or less popular over pre-COVID times, a couple of 2 years before that. But we talk about our industry being an extremely tactile industry. From a buyer's perspective, you still want to get out, you want to feel products, you want to feel the weight, you want to see the color in person, you want to try it on, you want to see how that fits in with your total portfolio of brands. And I don't think that will ever change. I think that's going to be here for forever. But what the digital platforms actually provided us with, and forced, as Alan said, a lot of people's hands who weren't using the likes of Joor before, is it provides another way of actually using a platform to buy. Because we talk about buyers are extremely time poor. If you think about a buyer going to Paris market, they're running around seeing 10, 15 brands a day. If they convert half of those brands, they have to write those orders in the evening. Now, the days of writing by pen and paper, they've long gone. Then it moved to Excel and typing everything up manually in Excel. And now the likes of Joor provide a platform in which brands can provide that database of their products to straight away, and you can very quickly select and quantify orders, which may before have taken you a week after you get back from market. Again, timelines in terms of production are getting quicker and quicker. We have to get orders in with our factories extremely quick, so therefore buyers have to provide us with orders very quickly. So again, just putting more pressure on buyers to actually get an end product. And these digital platforms just provide a very, very quick way to be able to do this. But from my point of view, I used to love going out into showrooms and actually seeing products in real life. That for me will never change. And it's the whole thing, I can correlate it with the strength of bricks and mortar versus online. People used to talk about, are bricks and mortars dead? Well, they'll never die, because there is an element inside all of us. It's a very deep feeling that people just want to feel products and they just want to understand a product by actually getting it in their hands, and that won't change. So bricks and mortar versus online, digital versus showrooms, the same sort of conversation. And for me, I really hope it never dies off. I think the excitement of going to Paris and seeing products in real life is, Paris, Milan, New York, Copenhagen, London, wherever it might be, that is still as relevant as it ever has been. But now we've just got that added bonus of having, platforms to be able to assist in that order raising. And also, the quality of what they're providing as well, the imagery, the way you can actually view products, you're having 360 digital videos on there, and everything that they're providing is just going to get better and better. So yeah, I definitely don't think we're going to see a drop off in real life.
Ben, what are your thoughts? Are we going to see the end of the For Marketing showroom in Paris?
It depends how strong the pound is against the euro, whether I can afford one. I think that I mean, there's a bit of, I'll try not to repeat some of what Darren said, because there's some context that I agree with in there. I think Joor as a tool it's a lot more than just an access point for buyers to look at product. I mean, it's very useful for consolidating orders, for protecting, even for production purposes from a brand point of view. And it is a very, very useful reference point. I mean, we use it the point about Joor is we use it in the physical showroom at times. So it goes across. It's not just a sort of digital tool for someone sitting remotely. We're actually using it in our business in a broader sense. I think, and I don't have any data to back this up, and Alan will probably completely tell me I'm wrong. And there's probably buyers and retailers maybe watching, listening to what we're saying. I'm sure there was quite a lot of black trousers that were bought on Joor that when they arrived, people didn't realise the fabric was that coarse or that soft or that thick, and that they were a bit wider than they thought or a bit narrower than they thought. I mean, we've had a few mishaps with colours and so on. But perhaps for the establishment brands, Joor probably works very well, even in a remote sense where you don't need that physical showroom interaction necessarily. But I also think for new brands, challenger brands where the fit of the product is extremely important, the hand feel of the fabrics is extremely important. I mean, we work with a wonderful brand called Bella Dahl from Los Angeles in our women's division, and such a strong point of the product is the hand feel. And you obviously can't touch anything through a screen, but where we outreach customers in other territories where we have rights to sell, something we started doing was we send them a piece of product. It's like you almost send someone a sample. It's a piece of stock effectively, but the cost of doing that is a lot cheaper than someone getting on a plane. It's more sustainable as well. But I think that it possibly works better for some brands than it does for others. And buyers like to get out and get in the showroom. I mean, Darren was a buyer, at a high level, and as he said, he used to love getting out there in the showrooms and touching product. And it's those conversations, the small chats around the table that offer those valuable insights. On a personal level, I used to enjoy Pitti Uomo because it was a kickoff to the new season, and you'd get a real feel. It was a bit of a barometer. To me, that show wasn't so much about the product and what was being shown. It was more about interactions and an industry barometer at a certain point in time.
Definitely, I agree with everything you said there. Alan, do you have a response to that?
Well, I echo Darren and Ben's general sentiment. I think the fashion industry is probably one of, if not the most sociable industries in the world. I think everybody loves getting together, whether it's an appointment in the showroom or a trade show. And if we can make it an evening appointment to go for a beer or an overpriced bottle of wine in Florence at the same time, then it's a win-win. What we did, and we were fortunate enough to be able to do within Joor, was when the pandemic hit, we kind of pivoted into the trade show spaces. Obviously, it wasn't just people that couldn't attend showrooms and appointments physically. It was also people attending trade shows. And that was where Joor launched Joor Passport. And essentially, we extended the virtual showrooms from private appointments with buyers to bigger global audiences, and partnered with trade shows all over the world. So we've kind of, to date, we've hosted 65 global events. We've had 350,000 retail visitors from 159 countries, and it's everybody from London to Milan to Copenhagen, East Coast and West Coast, America, as well as Asia, Tokyo. So we've had a busy few months with that. And even within some of the partnerships that we're kind of mapping out for 2023, again, covering the key territories, there's one general consensus and recurring theme that everyone seems to agree on. And I'm thankful for this. It's never going to go back to fully physical. Equally, it's never going to go back to fully digital. The future looks like it's going to be an amalgamation of both, and it's essentially a hybrid role. And to Ben's point, I think about having, or excuse me, might be Darren, about having Joor there for in-showroom appointments. Again, that's what we want to be able to provide, essentially a tool that complements the whole experience. So that's where we would offer the iPad app, for example. So when you're on the booth in the trade show, you don't have to flick through catalogs or PDFs. You can just, as you would on an e-commerce site, as if you're shopping online, you just kind of browse the catalogs. And again, with the offline capability, you can finish your selection on the Eurostar or the flight back home, and everything is kind of uploaded once you get back online. So it's again an evolution of how it used to be. It used to be so manual, but now these are supposed to be the benefits of tech, right? It's supposed to enhance our day-to-day lives, make things a little bit easier, and thankfully that seems to be the way it's going with Joor and the trade shows. And to Ben's point about not being able to touch product on screen, we're not there yet, unfortunately. I don't know how far it is. I don't think it's that far out. I think we'll see it in our lifetime. But the way the tech is evolving, like the fact that we are using augmented reality and AI now, means I'm sure it won't be that long.
I think when my next question was going to be around what is an efficient wholesale model today, but I think actually you've all sort of answered it individually. It seems what you're all saying is it's taking the best of everything, taking the best of in real life, the best of virtual, the best of digital, and using it where and when it can make things better. So you have the social element, you have the networking, you have the touch, but then you also, when you don't need that and you want to save the time, you also have the digital at your fingertips. I think that's another version of hybrid. You know, we talk a lot about hybrid working, and I guess this is hybrid wholesaling, maybe. We've had a few questions in from our audience, but I just thought it was a good time, now that we're almost halfway through, to give the audience a nudge. If you do have any more questions, do get them in. I was interested to ask the panel, it's particularly interesting for someone like Darren, who's kind of been on both sides, how in this new world, in this post-COVID world, has the relationship between buyers, between brands and retailers changed? And how can, for anyone listening, do you have any advice for kind of working together better, or collaborating in new ways compared to maybe how it was back in the day, or pre-COVID, as we say? Darren, do you want to maybe start us with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I've seen a huge difference in relationship between brand and retailer. I think what COVID did was brought the two closer together, and the lines of communication somewhat better. We had to, because we weren't having these roundtable discussions and meetings and face-to-faces. So there absolutely has been a pulling together in that respect. There's still certain retailers that still hold the upper hand over brands, and there's some brands that hold the upper hand over brands, or sorry, vice versa. So I don't actually see too much has changed in that respect. from a brand point of view, I think it's super important now to liaise with buyers, because you want to point a difference. The biggest thing, and I was touching it earlier, we're going into a very, very tricky period over the next couple of years. Now, the only way you can really circumnavigate that is to be flexible and to really look for a point of difference. And a point of difference may come in a number of different formats, but by speaking to buyers, you can understand exactly what they're looking for in store, and creating experiential feelings, or editorial online. So it's so important for a brand to have that line of communication and understand what the end consumer for each retailer is looking for, and how you create that point of difference. Because a point of difference might not necessarily come from having a different sort of product. It might be about telling a story in a different way. It might be about talking about the provenance of your product, or talking about the sustainable nature of your product. And listen, that's not a point of difference today. Everyone should be doing that as second nature anyway, but there might be different ways of actually communicating that. So I think that, to answer your question, I think the relationship between the two parties has to get closer, particularly for brands to understand a retailer's perspective and what's going to work and what's not going to work. But also, I think from a point of difference, from certainly when I was a buyer or heading up the buying team at Harvey Nichols, we went through periods of toughness as well, in terms of Brexit. That's a very difficult trading period. So you've got to be scouring the globe to find new brands. You've got to find something which is a point of difference, which no one else has got, because when times get tough, everyone battens down the hatches and really puts money into their key brands that they think will drive volume. And what you end up is a marketplace of very, very similar product, very similar selections, and it can become a little bit dull. So, we need that point of difference. You need something that's no one else has got, that exclusive. What is that next brand that you've discovered from LA, from New York, from Paris, wherever it might be, that you think is going to be the next big thing, to just give you that little edge on your competitors. So, again, buyers are having to be more communicative with brands to find out, what's going on out there. So yeah, I think the communication is the key thing for me.
And do you agree?
Hugely complex question. Such a simple question with such a complex answer, Graham. So again, I can buy into quite a lot of what Darren said. I mean, I think, again, for our business here, I mean, we work with so many different brands and sort of different shapes, sizes, and proportions. So I think there's multiple considerations. There's the brand strategies themselves. Brand positionings play a part in the type of partners that you need. Depending on the partners, depends on the type of support and partnership, because different retailers want different things. Some want to row their own boat but want support in very specific areas. Others want that flexibility. Can they reorder product? Are there continuity reorder programs they can buy into? What happens if they've got product that really isn't performing? What level of support may they seek? So we also face, and I think it is linked to this, a world that's been so driven by social media that the end consumer has become quite dictatorial in certain channels of business about what they want. And there's in bigger business, there's definitely probably less customer loyalty. So how does a retailer keep that customer loyalty? And similarly, therefore, if your customer has a real loyalty and stickiness for a brand, how much more can you support into that brand in that retailer, if you understand? Because across our portfolio, and I suppose often people, it's easy to know us for some of the big name brands, but we work with lots of other brands in our portfolio that do very nice business and are very successful for us and for the retailers that buy them. And I sometimes find that that's a bit more interesting, because it's a bit of a different ecosystem of business. And so, as Darren says, there's never a perfect equilibrium relationship between supplier, brand, and retailer. I think the perfect equilibrium doesn't exist. And everyone probably who's taking part in this, including the panelists, will all understand some brands, their strategy is to drive more to direct to consumer. Has been, if we touch back on what COVID did do, I think for some brands, for the brands at times, if they didn't have a strong direct to consumer business, they felt a bit isolated, because all their stock was in third party hands. Had they been paid? Could they get paid? What did it mean for them as a business? So it's a very waffly, convoluted answer to quite a complicated question. But I think a lot of it is pretty similar to 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Really, relationships are important, but ultimately it comes down to good product and a level of consumer, end consumer desire does drive a lot of the success that the supply chain has, the suppliers and the retailers themselves.
I totally agree. I think that's it leads really nicely into what a question that I was going to ask a bit later on, but I could ask it now, is has the definition of success within wholesale changed, or what is success? Maybe there's brands listening today and they're thinking it's having hundreds of stockists, or maybe it's having 5 but really, really strong stockists, or for want of a better phrase, cool stockists, the caliber of the business. And I know we've talked already in preparation for this, there's also other sides like growth and profitability, and there's all sorts of different levers that kind of drive that today, I guess. So I'm interested to know if anyone has an opinion on that. What do they consider success today in wholesale?
Well, I would say, firstly, it's not just about size. It's not just about how big you are. I think success is all linked to the strategy that you have as a brand. So what do you want your wholesale, in some way, if you take it from a brand point of view, what do you want purpose? Do you want wholesale to serve? There are brands that are 100% wholesale or 90% wholesale, and they're probably being almost forced into having their own e-commerce or website or even store or pop-up store. So I do think it comes down to individual scalability of brands. Some brands are very scalable, but they need volume to survive. Others are very happy to be niche and very purposeful in what they do. And when we're seeing the emergence of brands all the time, whether they've launched through social media. We've tried ourselves a couple of brands that say were launched and strong through social media, and pivoting them into wholesale proved very difficult because speed to market, the forward look. We're going to take orders, start taking orders in a couple of weeks, and we're not going to deliver that product for anything between 5 and 7 months. And some of the new generation brands that have tried wholesale, maybe that's difficult for them because their supply chain and their need for new product in their own channel restricts what they can do. So in summary, I think it really does come down to individual brand strategy. Do they want fewer, bigger, better customers? Do they feel more comfortable with a much more diverse assortment of customers? Kind of more customers is more safety, but it's also more operational overhead. So there are decisions that have to be made by brands and those in the supply chain side about what their strategy is. So I think success is proportionate to what you want it to be.
Good answer. Alan, I saw you nodding several times to there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be on a brand by brand basis, right? I think if you look at what Gani have just achieved, for example, achieving B Corp status, that was probably a big milestone for them and their sustainability goals. So that would be success for them. But now we know they've already got a steady wholesale business, and they're I should say, an existing partner, and one we're very proud of. But they're kind of revolutionizing and really streamlining how we quantify and manage sustainability. But I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think the kind of KPIs for success have really changed that much. I think whether it's order book growth with existing accounts, new retailers, new territories and market penetration, probably one of the newest ones is what I just mentioned around sustainability. But otherwise, I think generally the KPIs remain the same as they were kind of 3-5 years ago. What I am grateful for is to be able to be in a position that I can say, thankfully, Joor can again help you achieve your goals by kind of by working on whether it's profitability, reducing your travel budget and your need for samples, or new retailers, or vice versa, brands through the Joor Passport. There's a lot of ways that really kind of fully adopting the platform can kind of help you on the path to success.
Aaron, do you have any advice maybe in that kind of where it is different for every brand, but kind of how you focus on what that strategy is, whether it is sort of key accounts that you want to be seen in, or it's smaller businesses but stronger maybe? Any advice on that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the biggest things is every brand should be striving for longevity. Yeah, of course there's brands that want to come and go, and that's down to the nature of usually the owners or whoever's investing it and whether they want a quick buck or not. But something we always talk about is longevity, and the amount of brands that I've had in the past come to me and had this most unrealistic growth plan of wanting to be in 100 stores first season and want to turn over £1 million within the first year. And what they don't understand is their infrastructure as a small brand doesn't allow you to do that. I think Ben touched on it in terms of the back end, and having your supply chain, your logistics all in place. Because if you do suddenly grow a brand to 50 stores, how are you dealing with that as a small brand to be able to actually get that product out to those stores at the right time? Because you screw that up first season, for a better word. The likelihood is if you deliver a month late or a few weeks late to some of these big guys, you're going to cancel you or hit you with a trade discount. So you have to make sure that you have the infrastructure to be able to grow at that rate. So I think, again, you just have to look at what the brand strategy is. Some brands, as you said earlier, Graham, want to be in these high profile stores, these stores which are more of a marketing tool for them, and to put them on this pedestal, which then will, hopefully down the line, create more growth for them. But then the brands have to understand that those cool stores come with a lot of caveats as well. It may be a protection strategy for that brand, for the retailer that says, if you don't sell a certain amount by the end of the season, you can have that stock back. Or even worse, a salary return strategy where, you're going to get everything that you don't, goes back to you at the end of the season. And then, certain stores are looking for huge internal margins. And straight away, that's going to hit the productivity of the brand's margin itself. So, we have to approach every single brand in a very different way. We work with Pia Moss, who is celebrating their 10-year anniversary next year, and Kirby, who's the owner director, and he's not really gone out in terms of a massive wholesale strategy, and never has. Yet he's still creating this aura around the brand, which is very much in demand. So, from his point of view, we can create a really good direct consumer business, which is great for a margin, but then we can pick partners around it who really buy into the brand and buy into his ethos. And again, that goes back to the brand and what they want. Do they want a a 100 million brand within 10 years, or do they want something that provides an income but at the same time tells a story? So you have to be flexible in your approach to every single brand. But any advice to a new brand coming through is, really do analyze your internal workings. Make sure you have everything in place to be able to grow a level you desire. And build that into your financial strategy as well. You don't expect to do hundreds of thousands, millions in the first couple of seasons if you don't have an infrastructure to be able to support that. Otherwise you are going to fall by the wayside very, very quickly. And this is what we do within Newer, and I know a lot of other guys, Ben, will be doing this the same, is helping these brands and providing them with information to support them at that early stage, because it is a very fine line between success and failure at that level.
Great advice. There's actually a lot of questions from our audience around kind of from that angle of, small new brands and businesses, particularly a lot around, how do you get noticed? How do you get in front of those buyers and retailers? Any advice from the panel?
I think Ben touched on it earlier. The whole element of social media has turned the game on its head. There used to be, and this still happens, but more so, there used to be that buyers dictated the market, dictated a trend, dictated X, Y, and Z. But now, buyers are listening extremely careful to what the end consumer is saying. Social media, a lot of brands can grow on social media before they really come to the attention of any retailers. And, one of the brands which are making a big noise in the UK at the moment is Cortez. Cortez doesn't have a wholesale strategy at the moment, but they are causing massive ripples amongst the Gen Z customers of the world, and extremely desirable. But they've gone about it from a very, very different perspective. Is to grow their social media awareness before they do it via wholesale. Now that works, but for them, it might not work for other people. But I think social media is a really, really key part of how you position your brand to be able to grow. It's that touch point of, who can we target by social to be able to, understand our brand, our story in the best way. That's not to say that the old-fashioned route of really hitting the ground or the emails by, sending emails to buyers and I think that's still quite a key thing. But I think you have to be mindful that there's going to be a lot of rejection or a lot of, emails not being returned, because if you can imagine a buyer getting 200-300 emails a day with, people, they're already existing brands, but also new brands, trying to court them. Certain things do get missed, but I think it's about having that bit between your teeth to say, listen, I'm going to get in front of this buyer by hook or crook. We had a brand who's doing very well now, Patrick's from Australia, and before he really started making it in terms of being in every single department store you can imagine, what he did was came to the UK, DM'd people via Instagram. He said, listen, I'm in your store. Can you come and meet me at a certain time? He really did do the very hard groundwork to be able to get in front of buyers. And that was really before he even had a social media plan. So, it can be done, getting in front of buyers and getting them to listen, but you have to put the graft in.
And I'm interested to slightly tweak that question for you. How do brands who are already established but are maybe going through, an evolution or a rebrand, or not even, but people might think, oh yeah, I know them, but I don't need to look at them. But how do you get brand buyers interested in existing brands that they might think they already know about, but they should probably take a second look at?
I think you have a combination of patience, perseverance and determination. I suppose in our ecosystem, in our business, we have lots of customers circulating through. So they come to look at something, and do they find something else interesting in the showroom? And I think there's always an expectation to try and have something new, because buyers are always interested. Probably historically, I actually think women's wear buyers are much more open to newness and they're not, I suppose, in our experience and in our every showroom and business has a nuance, but I suppose on our men's side, you get so known for brands, and the UK market especially is so brand orientated at a premium and higher level, that almost buyers want to know, is it already a brand? I mean, people are going to walk in the shop, are they already asking for it? And who makes the running to get to the, are they coming in asking for it? And I think that feeds into Darren's point about some brands having a strategy about building their brand awareness much bigger than their sales, as almost a deliberate strategy. So you're building up some level of demand before you really even start placing product in the market. But I think a really important aspect for newer, younger brands as well, just to touch on that point. I think it's something I mentioned earlier about a particular brand we've been working with called Bella Dull. The brand, the product has a real USP in terms of the hand feel of the fabric. So it has something that's very, very quick to connect with. You like it or you don't like it, but I think that's better. I actually think you want to be a bit more, either you love it or you don't like it. It's nice is a hopeless response. Actually, you either want someone to fall on the floor, they're so in love with it, or to just go, yeah, absolutely not for me, don't get it at all. Have you got anything else to show me? So I think having that, if you've got a brand and a smaller brand and you're even thinking about launching a brand, what makes you different to what's already out there in a very congested market? And then I think how much patience you have. You have to show a lot of patience. There's a lot of brands that took a long time. There'll be buyers who will have taken on brands, given up on them, and then they suddenly explode. There'll be showrooms that had brands, did them for 3, 4, 5 seasons, didn't get very far, mutual parting of ways, and then a year later they're on fire. So I often say, if I knew what all of that was, I'd be on a yacht somewhere, tuning in to you, Graham, but definitely not in an office north of King's Cross.
I guess that's what we all love about the fashion industry, right? You never know what's going to happen. We've had quite a few questions specifically about Joor, which I think it might be, obviously everyone on the panel has some experience using it, so it could be beneficial to shed some advice. One person has asked if they're getting resistance from buyers to use it. How are you making it? How are you kind of embedding it in what you do day to day, or how could you if you're not already? If not, are there ever buyers who are resistant to it, and if so, kind of how do you bring them on board?
I would say, I think it links back to a few things we touched on earlier, and Alan touched on, is it can't be your only strategy. So I think if the answer to everything is go on, head to Joor, head to Joor, head to Joor, find us on Joor, here's a login to Joor. I think, especially in the UK, we're the worst at falling in love and then getting bored, So maybe it's Joor fatigue, and that maybe comes with success. I mean, I would say I didn't know the metrics and the metrics that Alan threw out at the beginning. Quite astonishing numbers, actually. So astonishing that I wrote them down so it helped me remember them. So no, I think that using these tools as part of, it's a bit like maybe a retailer, isn't it? This sort of omni-channel. Maybe we have to think, behave omni-channel. We can deal with you in different ways and provide you different access points into what we do. So a shop has a website. Someone might shop online, then come in the shop, wish they'd bought something they didn't buy, and buy it online, and you can connect through social and digital. So I think it's almost like the omni-channel, or I think that's the right word, of wholesale.
Yeah. I guess it comes back to what we said earlier. It's just what makes it most efficient for you, and helping helping the kind of the cogs turn as smoothly as possible. It's slightly off topic, well, not off topic, but I would just be interested to know your guys' views. Somebody has asked about this kind of movement towards marketplace models and like dropship, etc., which they've said obviously has benefits around stock agility, but there's also negatives to that. How do the panel think that kind of new models are going to kind of fit in with wholesale, and with wholesale kind of being the traditional and the strongest, how do you see them kind of helping each other maybe?
I guess what marketplaces do bring is an already formed captive audience. But at the same time, what brands have to understand is that there's so many brands entering this spectrum that unless you're going to invest in marketing to give yourself a voice in that already congested area, it's going to be very, very hard to succeed. I think where it does work is if you're an already established brand and people are already searching for you, then straight away the marketplace does provide you another route to market. But certainly for new brands, I've had a couple of new brands looking at particular marketplaces, and the actual investment financially that it takes to make you successful, often counters the success you'll get up front. So unless you have a big war chest of money behind you, it's going to take you probably approach it very carefully. If you have got that amount of money, you can invest in the marketing they provide. You can work in terms of how you deal with your own logistics or using the marketplace logistics. Then you can make it work, and it is a proven model. But again, I think it just comes back to the idiosyncrasies of each brand.
Yep, I agree. We are running out of time, so I'm not going to give that question to anyone else, because I always like to end these things, given everything that we've discussed, and we didn't even get to maybe thankfully look ahead to the kind of the choppy waters that might be coming in the next few months and year. But to sum up, I would love to ask you guys if you have one piece of advice maybe for our audience in terms of striving for success within the wholesale market. What would you leave us on? Ben, I started with you, so should I end with you?
Yeah, alphabetically, I suppose I have to go first. I think I go back to actually something I said earlier. I mean, make sure your strategy must be built on your product positioning, your USP. So where do you need to sit in the market, and why? And I think always remembering that the benefit of wholesale for brands, it gives them context alongside other brands. So be very clear about where you want to sit, how you're going to get there. An important strategy is to have a strategy, and understand. Darren touched on it earlier. What are your business metrics? How patient can you be? What numbers do you need to make your business sustainable? And I say that in the sort of financial ongoing way, not in terms of the specifics around responsible behaviors in terms of how you make and produce products. So I would say that's really a fundamental thing. Know where you sit and map it out. Know what your competitor set is, what you're up against. You don't want the first 10 buyers you speak to saying it's lovely, but I've really got that covered with this brand, because that's a bit of a heartbreaker as well when you're confronted with that.
Alan?
My advice from Joor's perspective, of course, would be just to encourage people to digitize their business. I think the manual, antiquated ways of managing a wholesale business are kind of we've moved on from now. So rather than taking up your team's time with sharing data or data uploads, improve efficiencies, digitize your business, take away all that manual work, and let your team focus on really and truly strategizing for growth, which will obviously be a combination of what both Ben and Darren will have covered.
Thank you. Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ben really sort of summarized it earlier in terms of having a very robust strategy to go to market. But what you do find with a lot of young new brands is they start off going direct to consumers, friends. So one thing I really would sort of say to people to do is to make sure you build your pricing strategy correct up front, because often if you're going direct to consumer to start off with to get a greater price point because your products cost more because you're not producing as much, you can't go to wholesale straight away because you end up pricing yourself out of the market, because you have to remember that you've got to build your margin, a wholesaler's got to build their margin. So before you know it, you start putting those factors in, you end up with a very high price point. And I've come across so many new brands who have an amazing price going direct to consumer and very competitive, but by the time they build in their wholesale model, they're absolutely uncompetitive and will not succeed in the market being a new brand. So really think about how you build that retail price, including your wholesale and your own margin.
Great advice. Thank you, Darren. Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for. For any specific questions that were sent in, I will link, I'll get them answered for you and email them over. Thank you so much to our panel, to Ben, to Darren, and to Alan. And thank you to our partner, Joor. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.